So I'm Virginia. I am with Sundance Institute's marketing department, and we are here today with the Art of Editing Fellows. We're going to learn about how their lab experience was, and we're going to learn about each of them and their projects. So we're excited, and let's kick it off.
Hi, I'm Michelle McGarrigan. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been cutting everything since high school. And so the last 12 or 13 years, I've been trying to work more on documentary. The Bay Area is very corporate and there's a lot of documentary here, but there's not that much narrative. So, you know, to make the money, you do the corporate, and then to do the passion projects, you do the documentary. So, so I've been living in both of those worlds for a long time. The kind of work I'm really drawn to is more historical based, sometimes more of the like archival rich films with really interesting links to the past and ways that we can explore it in the present. Yeah, so I'm really excited to be part of the Sundance crew now. It's really great.
I'm muted. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. Cesar, do you want to go next? Did I get that? Did I say that right? Okay.
Sure. Okay, a little nervous. Okay. So hi, my name is Cesar Martinez. I'm originally from San Antonio, Texas, but I'm living in Brooklyn, New York now, and this is where I've been doing most of my work. I have been editing for the past 3 years, but I have been primarily focused on my own filmmaking for ever since I was 12 years old. So I have really found editing to be a really, I think, beautiful way to support other filmmakers in telling their stories, and it's helped me inform my own storytelling. So I think that wanting to direct and make my own films in nonfiction, but also be an editor is sort of a really great matrimony of experiences to be able to tell stories that I'm drawn to. And those stories are generally Latinx stories. I'm really interested in films that are really immersive and that create their own worlds. So generally I'm drawn to films that feel very cinematic in the nonfiction realm, but that also are playing with form and are playing with ways in which stories are told. So films that are experimental in an accessible way, that are character driven, and I think, yeah, just stories that are really rethinking how we tell stories and why we tell them in the first place.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. Amber, how about you next?
Yikes. Okay. 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 Hi, my name is Amber Love. I'm currently based in the Chicago area, and I've been here for about 6 years now. And I work as a documentary editor, a film festival programmer, and a filmmaker, as in I make my own work as well. Let's see. As an editor, I'm interested in stories that push formal boundaries and are really interested in questions of how we relate to each other and why we interact with each other the way that we do, particularly from a feminine and BIPOC lens. So I'm interested in experimental work. I really enjoy nonfiction pieces that take new forms. I'm interested in VR, I'm interested in audio, really kind of the huge amount of material and platforms that are available to nonfiction filmmakers. Yeah, I think that's enough.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you, Amber. Anne, how about you next?
My name is Anne Yao. I am an editor based in New York City, and I was born and raised in New York City, and I'm still here. And the projects I mostly work on are feature-length documentary films, and it was a little bit of an accident, sort of. I went into that. I studied film in school, and after school, sort of my first jobs were mostly with documentary films, and I really connected with sort of other filmmakers and seeing what they were doing, and the projects that I'm most drawn to are anything that is that feels emotionally honest, and it's there is this sort of underlying desire to connect people together, audience, you to the audience, audience to one another, and That's it, I guess.
That was great. Thank you. Yeah, and Jason, how about let's hear from you now.
Great. Before I go, I just want to acknowledge it's so great to see the fellows again, especially like after I guess a month has passed since we had our week. So it's kind of cool to see you. And also, I've been on a bunch of panels in the past, so I want to acknowledge the awkwardness of this, but also say like, hey, you know, we're trying something different and it's kind of cool. So I'm glad I kind of like each of you kind of acknowledged it as well in different ways. My name is Jason Alarcon. I am a film editor based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was born and raised here as well, and I lived in New York for a few years in addition before I came back here. And what kind of got me into documentary filmmaking or film in general is kind of just, I think I'd probably step back and see like the power that film has on people, on people's minds, people's perspectives, on communities, on movements. It's kind of had a big, profound effect on my own life. Watching films growing up allowed me to sort of escape my, you know, my immediate surroundings and kind of learn about the world around me, about different cultures, perspectives, and people. And it's kind of through that I like wanted to get into it. And it helped me sort of discover myself and discover like my roots of my family being Latinx and being queer. I made a documentary about my Peruvian father. Was my first sort of film that I cut together on iMovie back in 2004, I think. My first ever thing I cut when iMovie was like kind of up and coming. And since then I kind of like just completely dove into like video, and I've worked on so many things. I've worked in corporate, I've worked in tech, I recently worked in advertising. And I always found myself coming back to documentary film because it's kind of like the medium that I find it like, it kind of gives me strength and power to like again like help like empower like filmmakers and people out there who are trying to like tell a story of something we don't typically see on media or in the news or read about, and kind of take like deeper dives into topics that I really, really care about around like especially queer and Latinx issues. So that's kind of like my entrance into filmmaking and being a documentary film editor. I'm currently in transition from like, I just left advertising. I'm kind of diving deep headfirst full-time into documentary film, and I'm really excited. And that's my spiel for now.
Great. Yeah, thank you all. It's really nice to meet you all. It's yeah, it's great to just hear what you have all been working on and learn a little bit more about you all. So yeah, I think that was a great starting point. I think the next question we want to get into is yeah, the next question is, how do you define the role of an editor in nonfiction, and what is it that you love about the craft? Let's see, maybe we'll start with Amber this time.
Let's see. I think the role of an editor in nonfiction is a really important one and a really interesting one. I think that chiefly an editor is kind of a synthesizer, in the sense that you're a person taking in a lot of story information, a lot of large scale thematic information, all of the very particular details of a person and their story and the way that they exist and are in the world. And then you're also taking in all of the kind of emotions and built up attention and work from the team around you, because you're also taking in, you know, working with the director, you're also taking in working with the producer, you're taking in a lot of ideas that have often built up over time, because nonfiction is such a longitudinal art form, and that, you know, you're working with people who have been working with these stories for years and years and years sometimes. So it's your job, it's our job, right, to really sit and listen and then parse through and kind of make as clear as possible all of these very sometimes disparate and big and large and small ideas. And so I think in that way, the editor is really a partner. It's the partnership between editor and a director, and frequently the producer, is really important in that there has to be a lot of trust there, because you're trusting each other to be heard and to be listened, and the director's trusting you with essentially like they're our baby, right? I don't know if you can use that, but that's fine. The director's trusting you with like this thing that they've worked so hard for, and you're also trusting the director to hear you and to walk this path with you to the creation of this film, whatever you're making. So I think that's really something that I enjoy. I really like listening. We've already talked on this call. I'm sure many of us are introverts. So I like listening. I like taking things in. I like kind of studying the world around me and then making decisions or having a feeling about it. And that's really a lot of what the work of an editor is, and what an editor does is just kind of taking it in and then hopefully creating something that is kind of clear and emotional and evocative in some way.
Great. Anybody else want to chime in next, or I can pick on someone? How about you, Anne? Do you want to go next?
Okay, yes. So I define the role of editor as sort of the first audience member. You know, you're sort of separate from the production, you know, like the director and producer, they're sort of more entangled with the production most of the time. So you're sort of, you know, kind of seeing it for the first time. And, you know, and you're trying to make sense of sort of, you know, your own emotions, but also, you know, the emotional reactions of, you know, your collaborators. And, you know, so those people, it's like, you know, your collaborators are the director and the, you know, producers and, you know, everyone else on your team, but it's also, you know, I feel like the subjects, like what you are filming, you know, and you sort of, you know, I mean, in documentary, we're always talking about like the truth, you know, and I think, you know, what we're really trying to find as an editor is like what feels true, you know, in addition to, you know, and that can be, you know, it's hard to pinpoint what that is, you know. And what I love about editing is, you know, it's kind of like playing. So, and it's very freeing, you know, it feels like anything is possible, especially in nonfiction. And, you know, I mean, the end goal, like, you know, I think is always just, you know, sort of, again, trying to tap into what is happening in your footage with your subjects, you know, and trying to communicate what you think, you know, it's like a psychic kind of thing, trying to pick up on what they're trying to say. Maybe they can't say it, you know, and, you know, that's why we're in sort of film. We can't say a lot of, you know, what we feel. And what else? I'm trying to keep the thread of this question. What else do I love about it? Yeah, I love the intimacy of it. That's the thing I love the most. You know, you get to be with these people, to be in these places, and, you know, you sort of live more, I feel like. And you know, you're entrusted with, you know, these people's emotions and feelings and opinions, dreams, you know, and try to want to bring out that humanness, I guess, that they have.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, you next, Cesar.
Sure. I think for me, the role of editing, often, I think during the lab, I think some of the advisors may have mentioned that editing was kind of like a puzzle. Like you kind of work on the border of the puzzle and then you start to fill in the pieces. But that means that you've seen the picture before. That means that you've seen the story before, that you have an understanding of the story beforehand. And for me, I think editing feels more like a collage, really, because there's sort of infinite possibilities of how you want to tell a story or how you want to shape a character or how you want to structure an arc. And I really feel like editing is being given a bunch of pieces of pictures and paper and colors and textures and feelings and kind of trying to make sense of them in a way that feels honest and feels inviting and feels like somebody can be a better person after they've seen a film. So I think that editors really are sort of entrusted with this beautiful process of writing, but also this beautiful process of just like reimagining what a story could be. And I think it's always an honor to be in that position.
Great. Michelle, how about you?
Sure. There might be some yelling in the background. Apologies. There
All
are a lot
good.
of children in my house right now. I told them to be quiet. That doesn't work. Okay. So to follow on what everybody already said, which has been really similar to what I would say, is that, you know, because of how long it takes to make one of these films, sometimes 10 years, you become many things over time. And to some extent, you're a writer because there's no script, because you're working on the project together and considering what the story arc is going to be together. You're a therapist for these documentary filmmakers. These ones I work with are usually first time. They're usually really early in the process. They barely shot anything. And so they're still trying to figure out what the film is. They have like 3 minutes of footage and they're trying to get an ITBS grant. And so you're really walking them through filmmaking, and you have to really build them up. You know, you want this film to succeed. And so you're making sure that team feels like they can. And, you know, what you bring to that is all of that. So there's a lot of like things you have to do about caring for yourself while you're caring for your team. I mean, you're a researcher, you're an archivist, you're pulling things to cover interviews because they don't have anything. So it's a really important job, and it's sort of the glue that holds that film together, right? You're that person that's doing what Cesar was saying, which was like putting the puzzle pieces together. But at some point, you know that you have to take that puzzle apart and start over some days, you know, and other days it's perfect the way it is, but the whole end of it needs to be done. And also filtering feedback for the directors sometimes, or vice versa, you know, that kind of thing. So it's really complicated, but I do believe that editors are writers on these kinds of films. I do believe that their voices in there just as much as a documentary director or even a producer. So
Great. And Jason, how about you?
The role of a film editor, I think Michelle described really well. You do play so many multiple roles when you're like getting on a film, including, I like how you talked about like therapists and a writer and like all these additional things, which I've definitely felt in many of the projects I've been on. And for me also, I kind of thought a little bit through your answers, and the film editor to me also is like like one of the strong main guides for I was thinking about like the senses, like the eyes, the ears, also like kind of the mind, the soul, the heart of the story of the film that the director and the team is trying to tell. It's a big collaborative process, and you know, different editors kind of step into the project in many different ways and from different perspectives. But it is up to the editor to sort of be that guide for the director and the team, and eventually the audience to unfold that story, to see the characters, to see the story unfold, to learn about whatever topic, situation, problem is sort of unfolding, and kind of sifting through all the pieces, because, you know, lots of films will shoot like 1,000 hours of footage and you'll really use like less than 1%. So it's really up to the editor and the post-production team to really sift through and really get down to the meat and nuggets of that 1%. Or, you know, 0.01% have you of the footage or archival, whatever footage you have, to really develop and present the story. So, you know, I think, like, to me, that's extremely exciting, like the role of the film editor to be like, to have that power. It's also very daunting and scary because, you know, sometimes when you're working down this process, you may come through an edit and it may like work really well, and you may hit the story on the nail on the head with the story. There are other times where you might like cut to get an edit. You're like, oh, this is not quite working, but like it's through that collaborative process, through, you know, working with the director, with the producer, with the collaborative team, through that collaboration that you eventually arrive at what is the finished film, the final cut. So I think like that for me. The film editor is like that star player guide to like help like guide the team through like the murky darkness that is, you know, post-production to get to like that final stage. I know we've all been there. We've all guided like ourselves and other filmmakers through this process. So yeah, that's kind of how I view the role of the film editor.
Great. Yeah, thank you all for those answers.
Can I just add one
Oh
thing?
yeah, go for
Sorry.
it.
So I think what interesting is it's partially why we talk so much about representation for you know, people, inclusivity and accessibility, is that we are also gatekeepers of this story. We end up putting on screen the people that we say represent this story, and we cut out characters, we add characters, we ask for things that we need shot, you know, so it's a director's call, but it's our input, and we're also responsible for the way that the characters are portrayed. We're responsible for their visibility, and it's daunting, it's scary to think that you did it wrong, and that you're not the right person to tell this person's story. So that's just another piece that makes it interesting and makes it complex and fascinating for me. So
Great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, the next question we wanted to talk about is, you know, I'm curious how you all came to nonfiction storytelling in particular. Was there some spark that sort of got you to working in nonfiction versus, you know, any sort of other narrative track you might have taken otherwise? Does anyone want to start that one, or let's see. How about you, Jason? You want to start this one?
Sure, I'll go first. My interest into filmmaking. So like I always kind of look back to like the first, I always mention like DVD players and the behind the scenes features on DVDs, like the making of, is like my first really like curiosity into filmmaking. Like I was like, oh wow, there's a whole team of people that are working on like, I don't know, Chicken Run or Mission Impossible from what I remember. And I was just very fascinated by like all the craft and details that went into it. And then I attribute largely my entrance into documentary film to technology and things becoming cheaper and more accessible to people like me. I come from pretty humble beginnings. I mean, my dad had a Super 8mm camera, but you know, I didn't kind of grow up around like artists or people in the industry. So when like iMovie kind of came out and people were working on, you know, Macintosh computers, editing digital video, which was a lot more accessible than film, on iMovie using like mini DV tapes, that kind of like got me really excited. And I was handed a project actually in high school to make a short doc about someone we knew who immigrated to California. And I decided to do one about my dad. And I spent a lot of time teaching myself editing and some animation. And then long story short, like this film got kind of recognized by the local television station. And from there, I kind of just took off and just continued learning like Final Cut and then like shooting and a whole bunch of other stuff. And I tried nonfiction filmmaking in college, and I've tried a whole bunch of other things. And I think I've mentioned before, I've done advertising. I live in San Francisco, so there's a huge tech businesses around that, you know, require video services. I've done law, healthcare, like you name it. But I've always found myself coming back to documentary filmmaking as kind of like a tried and true passion, because a lot of the projects I've worked on I just felt were like the most rewarding. A lot of the stories that were being told were stuff that I personally cared about. And yeah, it's like documentary film has been something that's kind of like taught me a lot about myself and the people around me. And so I think back to like, you know, that time when I was literally sitting and working on iMovie, you know, figuring out how to like cut and like put things together. And now today, you know, I'm editing stuff on Avid and Premiere. And, you know, I kind of look back and just attribute a lot of like my interest in film to like just being exposed to that and to technology really making accessible to like people like me who wouldn't probably be able to afford a film camera or like film equipment.
Thank you. Anyone want to jump in on this one? How about Cesar? You want to go next?
Yeah, so I think I find documentary filmmaking to be a really interesting tool. I think, sorry, let me just close my, it's hard when I see myself. I find documentary filmmaking to be a very I think, a very useful tool to interrogate dominant images. So I think my interest in documentary primarily comes from an interest in wanting to understand what types of images I was looking at when I was growing up, what types of images certain communities are spoken to with, and how the way we look at the world is really informed by the way in which we look at our screens, and how our screens can I think be taken to places of greater questioning and interrogation, so we can understand how we shape our worlds more intentionally.
Great. Michelle, how about you?
Cool. Well, so I went to film school because I was obsessed with Hollywood filmmaking, but of course I didn't go to film school in Los Angeles. So I became part of that kind of sort of smaller filmmaking community in Salt Lake City, which was very artsy and very experimental. And documentary was kind of a sideline, and it never really crossed my radar. I was always one of those people who wanted to escape. So I always wanted to see things that didn't require a lot of thought. And then, once I worked at Apple for a long time, and we were developing Final Cut Pro, and I met a lot of different filmmakers as a result. And I got to see, what that kind of software would bring people to the table and bring stories out that wouldn't have been possible, 10 years ago. So that opened my mind a little and made me more interested in more challenging stories and more challenging viewpoints. And then after I left Apple, I worked at ITBS. And knowing the kind of content that goes through ITBS, I would spend all day watching genocide documentaries and things like that. And it was utterly depressing some days, but I always had something trigger my thought process. It always changed my mind about something or made me think harder about things. And that's the power of film in a lot of ways. It's powerful in narrative as well. But I think that because documentary comes from a realistic place with people who exist in real life, it seems like it's more adapt to change people's minds in a more profound way. And it can be sneaky, it can be really overt. And I appreciate the diversity of that. And I appreciate that I could work on a film that would change even one person's mind about a topic that I feel passionate about. So that's why I like docs.
Great, thank you. How about you, Amber?
Let's see. There's a lot of ways to come at this question. I think for me, in the context of the conversation we've already been having, is that I've always been really interested in the question of why do we behave the way that we do? Why do people behave the way that they do? How do they interact with each other, and why? And really in the question of why, there's a lot of history in that question. There's a lot of cultural and societal and scientific, if you want, diagnoses that can go into why do people behave the way that they do. And when you get to the question of why, when you start to understand why, then at that point you can maybe start to change some of the ways that people behave and some of the ways that people relate to each other. So for a long time, I came at this question from a lot of different angles. I thought I would be a neuroscientist. I thought I would study cognitive neuroscience and research brain chemistry, and then I thought I would do anthropology. And really, all of these areas of study are, for me, have always been in the service of that question: why do we behave the way that we do? And, there was never really a point at which I was like, yeah, nonfiction is the thing. But really, in retrospect, I think, quite honestly, being in Chicago has been a really big influence for me on why nonfiction, why is this kind of the way that I've begun to approach these questions in this world, because Chicago in particular, and this is true of many places, but Chicago is the place that I know best. Chicago in particular has a very long history of interrogative filmmaking, of social justice filmmaking, of using the camera and using films to really question why things are the way they are and what is going on, ask questions that other people aren't asking in ways that other people aren't asking them. And so just being in Chicago and learning under some of the great documentarians that come out of Chicago, but also just the style of kind of like guerrilla filmmaking and getting in the way and asking questions. That's really the point at which I started to see in this Chicago culture of like what filmmaking can really do, and not just the finished product, the actual act of filmmaking, of asking these questions and going into these spaces and interrogating these things is also a productive way of questioning and trying to make change of some kind, little, small, big. I just said little and small at the same time. That's fine. Asking questions at all of these different levels, I think the act of filmmaking really interrogates that from beginning to end. So that is why nonfiction filmmaking, one aspect of it.
Great. And I think, Anne, you're the last one for this question. You want to go ahead?
Yeah. So my sort of path to, I think, nonfiction storytelling is sort of a little scattered, I never watched movies growing up, like any movies. I only watched like very bad television for very long periods of time. And, as I sort of got older and was a teen, I had some interest in film and, mostly from popular Hollywood films. And I decided to study film in college. And that was sort of the first time I was exposed to, documentary film, foreign cinema, and both those things moved me a lot. And I thought, wow, I didn't know films could be like this, and after college, I started working at a post house, and we had a lot of, documentary filmmaker clients, so they had very long edit periods. And that's, so the first time I met editors, and, they were all like the most intelligent, empathetic people like I ever met, open-minded, and they had an artistic job, and I so I was kind of a wannabe a little bit, and that sort of opened my eyes. It's sort of as like a career path, but yeah, and the thing, it's funny, it's hard to think of like nonfiction storytelling without thinking of editing. Like they are just sort of like married, and that's what appeals to me, is that I feel like this, how you cut, is always changing. So it sort of makes it a very exciting form of storytelling, that it's still evolving.
Great, thank you. Next, we'd love to get a sense of, if you could tell us what you're working on now in terms of the projects that you've either been working on or have coming up. Anyone want to start on that one? Let's see. How about Michelle? Let's start with you.
I am ramping up to start cutting the initial phase of a documentary about a song that was written during the Holocaust about a hidden Jewish child. And it's her descendant who's making the film about her family and her family's journey, and also the path the song has taken through the world as, outside of the family. And it's become a popular Yiddish folk song. So it's called The Lonely Child. And we start that next month. But this summer, I've actually been working on a fiction film. So I finally finished my first feature, and it happens to be narrative. But it's a story reel, so I'm cutting storyboards together to create a film out of nothing, basically. So I get 5 pictures and some sound effects, and here make a movie. And it's a huge journey for me, because it makes me realize how important sound is to picture, obviously, but also to listen just to an audio recording and just decide whether that is the right performance for the picture that's on screen. So it's really helped me inform how I cut doc, and that was the reason I got the film, was because I cut doc. So it's been great.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Anne, how about you? What are you working on right now, or what have you been working on?
So for the last few months, I've been editing a web series, which is sort of a new uh, thing for me. Sort of short form content. Generally, I do sort of feature length films. And so it's a web series called Black History in 2 minutes, and so that's sort of self-explanatory. It is, each webisode covers, some topic related to Black history in the U.S. So, it's American history. And the topics are, range from like a notable subject or event usually. And so it could be, someone very well known, like, Harriet Tubman or Malcolm X. So lesser known stuff, it could usually covers, there's so many things. Examples are like the Tulsa race riots and the Harlem Hellfighters or infantry in World War One. And yeah, that's been sort of interesting adjustment. I mean, the time constraint is a sort of a new painful elements, but it's been a fun challenge. It incorporates a lot of graphics, which I like, and it's also trying to think of, which is a very hard thing to do. I think present, because it's generally archival, I would say present something that is historical, that can inform the present moment. That's not something that it's not only just something that happened, but it is a part of like our history. So yeah, so that's been fun.
Great, thank you. Jason, let's hear from you next. What have you been working on this summer or lately?
The past few months, I've cut a couple of like sample footage reels for a couple docs. One being about a queer transgendered politician running for office. I currently just transitioned full time into documentary film editing, so I'm looking for work. But I also have been working for a couple of years now, actually, on a documentary around the topic of queer youth homelessness, and basically the goal of like this team I've been a part of is to tell the story of one or more youth in the San Francisco Bay Area experiencing queer youth homelessness. It's been a bit of a struggle of a project for various things, including like grants and fundraising, but largely because it's a population that's sort of hard to kind of like connect with, although we have in many ways, and we're connected to a lot of individuals and organizations and leaders and activists, which is really exciting. But I'm especially excited right now because I've been in conversations with a person, a storyteller, a collaborator. I don't like the word subject. I know a lot of documentaries use the word subject. To me, it sounds very colonial. So I'm going to use the word storyteller, collaborator. We've been in contact with this storyteller, and we're figuring out ways to record interviews and footage and follow this person over the next, I guess, like year or two to kind of document the story of a queer youth who has experienced homelessness and how to sort of like tell his story. That project is right now kind of in development right now. It's been, it's documentaries. Each documentary has a different story. I always say documentary is a struggle. This documentary isn't any different, but I'm pretty excited about it. It's something I and the team kind of care about telling. I guess I'm doing like some like directing and producing more so than editing, but I'm looking forward to sort of applying my, expertise and skills in editing to cut something together once we get the footage so we can win some grants and get the story told.
Very cool, thank you. Cesar, you want to go next? What have you been working on lately, or what's coming up next for you?
So lately I've been working on getting a short that I shot last summer done. So I've been sort of culling feedback from a lot of the advisors who were in the lab, who've been taking a look at the short. It's a short about call centers in Tijuana, in Mexico, and they're primarily staffed by folks who've been deported from the United States. Those call centers operate entirely in English, and they're providing customer service to companies across the United States. So I'm still sort of figuring out what I'm going to do with the short, but for now I'm just trying to get as much feedback as possible from as many people as I can. And I finished sort of doing a first rough cut on a short about a queer elder Black woman in Brooklyn who was promised sort of housing at a new sort of like queer elders housing center in Fort Greene. And sort of the story tracks her process in wanting to move into this new building, but it ultimately sort of like results in her disappointment with the size of the size of the apartment and how small and sort of like so how impossible it is for her to be able to live in a building that really doesn't like cater to somebody who has so much history. So that project is sort of like something that I started cutting a few weeks ago in early July, and now we're in that process of also gaining feedback from as many people as possible, or not as many, but it's a few trusted individuals. And I just got an email right before the session about a file for a film that I finished editing back in July, and I just got the color file back from the colorist. So I have to put that all together and export it tonight, but it's like 98 gigs and my computer's not very great. So we'll see how that all goes. And hopefully, fingers crossed, I'm not gonna jinx it, I'm gonna knock on wood, but there is a short that I have been talking to, and I think hopefully I'll be able to get started on it this week if they decide that they want to work with me.
Nice. Sounds cool. Keep them busy. Yeah, great. And Amber, how about you? What have you been working on, or what's next? Yeah, tell us about your projects.
I mentioned at the top that I do editing and festival and my own work. So summer is programming season for me. So right now I'm largely watching hundreds of hours of nonfiction films, which is fun. I wouldn't do it if I didn't like it. So that's my summer. Basically, it's a good thing we're all inside, so I'm not sad. But I just rolled off of a few other projects. It's fine. So basically, this summer I'm programming, and then I'm also in the process of developing two of my own projects. One of them in particular is a multimedia project looking at cultural memory and the creation of Black history through the lens of this abandoned tourist attraction in Southern Illinois. And that's been really exciting. It's probably the biggest project that I've ever set out to do of my own. And so it involves a video component and a VR component and an audio component, and kind of we've partnered with a local reporter, and there's a co-director and I, so kind of unearthing all of this material and all of these conflicting story points kind of around like what actually happened at this abandoned tourist attraction has been really exciting and has been a lot of fun and daunting at the same time, I would say. So those are the things probably taking up the most of my time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. I bet, yeah, programming probably does give you so many insights about, all these different other projects coming through the pipeline.
It's a really good meld of careers, yeah. I would say. I would recommend it.
Very cool. Very cool. I put myself on mute. The next question I kind of wanted to bring up, I think the lab afforded you each the opportunity to do a deep dive into your voice and the creative process, but I'm curious to know if there's any specific lesson or takeaway that sparked for you after hearing one of the other lab participants discuss their work, or after hearing, one of the lab advisors, talk through their work. Anybody want to start on that one? Let's see. Cesar, you wanna kick that one off?
I think it was really sort of eye-opening to realize how I think the advisors and my peers as well, my fellow fellows, were really sort of instrumental in making me realize how much editing is about feeling, and how much editing is about intuition, and how much editing is about just, I think, really, for me, let me start this one over. I think what was really, really I think something that I really learned through the process of this lab from my advisors and my peers in the fellowship was that editing is so much about feeling. And I think there was a really impressive moment where um, one of the advisors was telling us about how, you know, and this is super technical and like maybe just a little nerdy, but I'm gonna go ahead and just talk about it for a second. But an editor was telling us about how they would have bins where they would put something like the color blue or the color red or a certain texture, or, you know, they might have a bin called happiness, or they might have a bin called like sunsets or something. And sure, like those things can feel so categorically organized and they might feel a little scientific, but I think what was really beautiful about that approach is that you're really not so much thinking about telling the story to tell the story. You're thinking about building a world around different textures that can be found in the voice of a character, or it can be found in the way light falls on a wall, or it can be found in the way that somebody talks to somebody else, or the way that someone reacts to something else. I think there's just like going back to this idea of infinite possibilities. I think that's what's so exciting about editing, and that's what became really clear to me throughout the process of the lab was that you know, there's a million different paths that you can take, and there's always this sort of strange alchemy of things coming together, and all of the different sort of periodic elements of the story will somehow come together and they'll make this beautiful potion that I think you know, you want people to you want people to be to yeah, I mean, you want people to drink, I guess. I don't know if that sounds awkward, but
No, I love it. And I love the idea of like a collection of sunshine, or, you know, just some waves. I think that's really beautiful. Jason, what about you? What's your kind of your takeaway on that?
Oh gosh. My takeaway from the labs has been, it's been so much. It was actually quite, well, I'll acknowledge, like the labs itself were it felt like, Kristen described it, I think, well, like as a marathon. But it was such a marathon of like information, ideas, of inspiration. I felt like extremely inspired. I think what inspired me the most was just the sort of the detail around like the collaborations that each of the advisors and like also fellows have like gone through in each of their projects. And this includes like, you know, the really successful ones and the not so successful ones. It was just very eye-opening to like hear, to kind of like be able to commiserate with like Mary, Carla, Grace, Carlos, like forgetting some, Katrina, and you know, and all the fellows about like projects that didn't go so well, why they didn't go so well, like how they kind of like were able to unpack like what they learned from, you know, learn from certain projects and how they were able to like use that, move on, learn from their experiences, and just kind of reflecting it upon myself and my own experiences on all these like collaborations I've had, some that have worked really well, some that haven't. Like I come to realize like, wow, like I felt like a lot less alone. Like, you know, the past couple of years I've been working in advertising, doing documentary stuff on the side, and I realized like, wow, you know, documentary is a struggle for every documentary filmmaker. You know, there are documentary filmmakers out there who have a lot more resources at their disposal in various ways, and there are a bunch like ourselves who maybe don't have as many resources, and there's communities like Sundance, or like, you know, the film communities in New York, Chicago, and the Bay Area that kind of support each other, and that like that my biggest takeaway was sort of that like inspiration of like, you know, maintaining community and like reaching out to people to try to like, I don't know, stay focused on like your craft, and, you know, and also realize that, you know, not every collaboration or every project you work on is going to be, you know, actually, I don't think none of them are like bright, butter, easy. Like there's always that struggle to like come to the final finish line. And just because you see someone's name, their credit and their name in the credits doesn't mean that it was like it was an easy path to, you know, to work on that project or to work on that piece of art. And so that was kind of my my realization at like during at the end and after like our lab week was that the whole like, I guess I could say like the whole like complexity of collaboration, and I'm very, very, very grateful for it.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Amber, how about you? What's your kind of takeaway from the labs and from working with your fellows and your advisors?
Yeah, I think I had a few really strong takeaways from the lab. I mean, the lab overall was just amazing. But one of my biggest takeaways from the lab is just Kristen and Betsy and Andrea and the entire DFP team just did a really amazing and thoughtful job of assembling a really strong group of people, both fellows and advisors, who are coming at this work of editing from a lot of different backgrounds. I mean, we had VR and augmented reality artists, if you want to consider social media augmented reality. I think I do. But so we had experimental artists. We had people coming from a producer background and directing background, and all of them also had a practice of editing in their work. And I think particularly as a person that's coming from a lot of different backgrounds, and I want to continue to work across several different fields as I go forward, really thinking about how to make that work and how others make that work. And there's just so much to be said for listening to the experiences of others to kind of think about yourself and chart your own path. And I think also in that, another big takeaway from this lab is that, as has already come up in this conversation, editing is very emotional work. It's very taxing, and I think taxing has a negative connotations, but I don't think it should. I think that you put a lot of yourself into a project that you're editing, and so along with that, you also need to take care of yourself and recognize your needs and learn to advocate for yourself, because again, as we've brought up, there's a lot of trust and a lot of emotion and a lot of time and attention that goes into this. So thinking about making sure that we're all taking care of ourselves in order to continue to do this work in a productive and sustainable way.
Right, yeah, and it seems like especially now with everything going on, and we're all at home, so yeah, that's great. Michelle, what about you? What's your takeaway, or what's your thing that you took from your fellows? And I got to stop saying that. Your fellows and your advisors.
I mean, it's something that I've been working towards getting into the lab for a long time, ever since I heard there was such a thing. Like, the idea of a summer camp for editors sounded freaking amazing, right? Like, and it's a bummer I couldn't be in the real world with everybody, but like, it was because of that, they created this space where we got more. We could have been working our butts off in hot trailers and editing in our pods, or we could be discussing, and instead of only discussing at happy hour, that kind of thing. So I really appreciated that opportunity. And while it was a weird way of beginning this journey, it was perfect for what I needed. And so being, an older emerging editor, it was a little disconcerting to be called that, because it felt like, God, how old am I now? Jesus. But it was necessary. Like, it was one of those things where I had to constantly change myself to fit the job, right? And now I'm like, screw that. I don't have to do that. Like, I'm what you want because of me, not because of what you need. Like, there's like this very subtle shift that happened in the lab where I was like, all these advisors are like, you're getting me as a person, you're getting me as an editor, and if you don't like that, go to a different editor. I'm not going to be who you want me to be. I'm me. So that was huge. And it was also great to see people's work, not their finished work, but their pre-finished work. And that's super rare. Like, it's rare to find a group of people that feel comfortable enough to share their rough cuts with you, or to share their early cuts with you. And that's something I learned from so much. And the more I can get that, the more I learn. And because I learned more than that, than just talking, I learned from seeing. And that was just, to see these high level editors showing me their rough work was like, whew, never going to see that again, right? So anyway, I super appreciated that.
Great, thank you. Yeah. Anne, what about you? Any takeaways you wanted to share, or any
this sort of echoes some of the other fellows' takeaways, but my sort of big takeaway was, I had so many. I mean, one, it was fascinating to sort of see everyone's journey, you know, just our advisors, but also the fellows and, you know, what they're doing, what their backgrounds and, you know, sort of what kind of work they're doing, what they're interested in. And you know, my other big takeaway from the lab is, you know, this idea that, you know, like we have control over like how we define success. I mean, sometimes it feels like we're like at the bottom of the totem pole. Sometimes I think when you're editing that, like, you know, that we don't really have control over the choices we make or something, you know, but we, you know, we do. I think Carla was saying, like, you know, even when she was just starting, you know, she's still sort of like geared toward independent documentaries, you know, even when she was sort of, you know, a nobody or whatever, you know, not as far along in her career. So that was sort of a powerful sense, you know, of not, you know, I mean, I think in this industry, sometimes it feels like, you know, you're in a race, you know, but I think, you know, the lab reminded me that, you know, each of us has our own sort of journey in editing and how we arrive there and, you know, what we will do, you know, in that journey. And also, you know, Michelle was also saying, you know, this, you know, the lab, you know, gave me a sense of sort of confidence, you know. I mean, not permission to believe in myself, but maybe a little bit, you know.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, these have been great answers, and we're going to ask you guys one more question, and then we'll kind of wrap it up by sending it back to Eric and seeing what he'd like us to kind of go over if we have any introductions we need to re-record. So yeah, thanks for bearing with us. Let's see. So yeah, the last question. You know, the lab took place at this moment of profound change. You know, not only COVID and you know, this global pandemic, but also the protests against systemic racism and racial inequality. And how have those present circumstances, you know, impacted what you think about the role of what an artist is and should be? Anyone want to kick it off with that one? Let's see, who have I not picked on lately? Michelle, do you want to start on that one?
Oh man, that's a big question.
This is the hardest one.
It's gnarly.
All here and
Okay, all right, sure. Stretch out. Okay. So I think about 4 or 5 years ago, I took the red pill. Like I had never really thought that I had this place of privilege where I came from, you know, a white background more or less in my mind. And I never really saw that there was racial inequality for me specifically. And while I am biracial, I just sort of suppressed that part of me to be part of the room. And I was in these rooms with these powerful men, and I felt like I needed to be one of them and I needed to assert myself that way. Coming into documentary, it's a totally different space. There are different people, there are different voices. And after I started watching more films and talking to more people, I realized that there's obviously a distance between people of color and, you know, inclusion and access for people. And, you know, after joining Brown Girls Doc Mafia and being privy to all these conversations, like realizing that this is a very different world for some people, and that my story is much less painful on the scale of pain, you know, than others. So I think after seeing that, I couldn't unsee it. And there was always that thing where I was like spending years just trying to understand the language, understand the culture, and what am I missing in my privileged point of view. So now when everything's becoming a bit more open to talk about, it's sort of trying to figuring out ways where I can change things in my small corner of the world, whether it's as a mother or as an editor, or you know, however, if I'm an artist, what is my role in all of that? And it's, you know, part of it's hiring, part of it's connecting with more people, whether they're online or in person, even though we can't connect with anybody in person right now. and figuring out how I can give back. And, you know, for me, it's about joining the Alliance of Documentary Editors, joining Brown Girls, joining ADOC, and speaking to people who are already fighting this fight, and trying to follow in their footsteps of keeping the doors open for people behind us, and the people in front of us keeping their doors open for us, and just creating that other pipeline that's not the industry pipeline that doesn't seem to work for all of us. So yeah, that's what I've been thinking about in my brain, and it's deep and scary and fascinating and great to learn. So
thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. Jason, how about you? What do you want to say on that topic?
Oh boy, gosh, I have a lot to say. I could talk at length about this. But to for real talk, to kind of get into the nitty gritty, like I, as a filmmaker, have been as an artist / filmmaker, I've been kind of really concerned with a lot of things that came to even light, like during George Floyd week before, and all the Ahmaud Arbery, and all the countless other lives that have been taken. Kind of just being observant in my career, I realized two things. I realized that I have a lot of privilege, and I also lack privilege. And it kind of comes with, I'm a cisgendered male. I had a very good education. I've been housed. I've been supported. I'm part of the Sundance community now. I'm also disprivileged. I'm queer. I'm Latinx. I come from I don't come from a particularly wealthy background. I don't have connections in the industry. Yada yada. I can kind of go down the list. And I remember this has come to light in many instances in my life, because I've entered a lot of, actually pretty much every space, most spaces I've entered, I've been the minority. And I've just kind of noticed, just kind of reflected on myself, whether it's the person I'm on a team with, his family is able to purchase a nice video camera and other resources for this other person that I'm part of this collective in, or I'm working on a feature doc and then I get replaced by a white male assistant editor. Or so many rooms, I've entered so many post-production editorial rooms, and where the majority are cisgendered white males. I'm a male, so I'm kind of also a part of that problem as well. And I've recognized it. I've brought it up. I've actually constantly brought it up with other filmmakers and friends. But it was, I think, especially now during the pandemic, where I've kind of been a little bit louder about it and kind of really spoke up at work, spoke up to friends, spoke up to other individuals. And it's a problem that's just not existent in the film community. It's existent in tech, in healthcare, in law, in higher education, everywhere. You walk into nonprofit, you walk into all these spaces and it's lacking in diversity. So I think it's important that we recognize that the privileges we have and privileges that others don't have in the spaces we are, and really fight to try to even the playing field for equity as much as possible, because otherwise, I think the world will become a better place, not just for ourselves, but for other people as well. And especially in the filmmaking industry, or in films, we'll have just more, really more authentic films, more authentic stories that are told. I can't tell you how many film festivals and films, I don't know if anyone else can agree, that I've been to, where I've been to the Q&A and it's a white male or a white team speaking of the film, and you hear, I think Carla talked about this a lot, you don't hear about the accountability of these filmmakers not being able to tell, or just how they enter the space and are telling stories of minorities, and they're lacking it, and it's really, really frustrating. But I'm also very hopeful that at least us, and hopefully other filmmakers like us, can kind of carry the torch and really hand it off to Black, trans, queer voices, and other minority voices that need to be heard more than ever. Not just handing over the torch, you hand over the resources, the gear, the skills, what have you, to hand over, because I was privileged to have a great filmmaking education, even though I'm mostly self-taught. And there are other people who just don't have that opportunity, who have stories to tell. So that's, yeah, I can kind of go on about that, but that's yeah, I'll stop there.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Yeah, you articulated all of that so well. And yeah, it is a topic we could probably have a whole Zoom just talking about that. So thank you. How about you, Anne? Do you wanna say anything on that topic?
Yeah. Sorry, looking at the question.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's so. Oh
It's
my
kind of a
gosh.
dense. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my god. I don't. It's like I don't have an answer, but I have so many of the similar thoughts as the fellows.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think of how to start this sentence. Um, in light of sort of protests happening and COVID, really has made. I'm glad it has sort of had a reckoning on our industry. I think maybe the fellows also have often maybe in a professional setting been the only one in the room, whether they're a woman or a person of color or different sexual orientation, or able-bodied or anything, and it's we all but even given that, like Jason was saying, we also have a huge privilege as a filmmaker, sort of in terms of what story we tell even when we're editing, and but it doesn't start there, it sort of goes further back of like who even has the opportunity to tell the story in the first place. And I don't know. It's so complicated. It sheds light on sort of the responsibility of the artist, period, especially in documentaries when we're sort of, it's like we sort of are like invading, who we're filming. And I don't let me try to backtrack a bit. It's just, it's a lot. I think,
Great. Yeah.
Thinking about, again, it's like I could go on about sort of what everyone's feelings are of the problem, but it's like, to think about what we can do. Again, I think, one thing is to, I think, be aware of your team, your own voice, of course, but also, the artist is not alone, I mean, the community, it's, they need to sort of be aware, listen better to everyone around them. And if, I think a good thing also about this moment is that maybe it makes people feel more brave to actually speak up against discrimination, when they see it. And, we're sort of just at the beginning, but we're also in this bubble of privilege, just also as filmmakers, Yeah,
No, that was great. Thank you so much. And I think you guys are all bringing up so many important conversations for our industry about accessibility and who gets to tell stories and who gets, the privilege to even to pick up a camera or, sit at the editing bay. So that's great. Amber, do you wanna kick it off next?
So I've been reading Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategies, recently. And one of the really salient points she has in this book that is largely about ways of organizing and ways of making political change is that big problems need a plethora of responses. And so when we're talking about social change and societal change, I'll start that again. When we're talking about social change and societal change, these changes need approaches on all levels and all fronts, right? We need policy change. We need people in the streets. We need protests telling us when things need to end or be torn down. And we need culture workers. And so clearly, I mean, we're all coming at this, at least in this conversation, as culture workers. And really, I mean, all art is political. Every piece of art is political because all of these films, all of these stories, all of these tiny little moments add up to a record of history. And the thing is, we need to understand that history is created. History is a story that is synthesized over time, looking at past articles and writing a story of what happened, writing a narrative of what happened. And so I think it is the role of the artist to carry stories forward that may have been forgotten, or may need more attention, or just to keep them present, to keep them present, keep them in the present. It's, I think it's the role of artists to carry forward stories and to keep them in the lexicon, both historical stories, but also present ones, to make sure that these stories have a record that are then carried forward. I mean, artists are really kind of the record keepers of our time. And so then it's very important that if we want to have a complete record, we need as many stories as possible from as many different lenses as possible. So then others that come after us can look back and have this really rich, diverse record of events to then consider, well, what is the history? Because again, history is created, history is written, history is not a fact. It is a thing that we create. So it is important that artists do the work of telling the stories that don't get attention, and also holding and bringing forward stories from the past.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, history is like the act of editing itself, right? I think that's so so well said. Let's see, Cesar, do you wanna close this question out, and then we can go back to whatever Eric needs from us?
Sure. I think living through this historical moment as an artist, and I think I will answer this more primarily as an editor, has reinforced this idea for me that I hope I can be of service to folks that want to tell their stories, and I hope that I can be there to support stories that are necessary in order to create historical change. I hope that I can, I hope that me and the rest of the fellows can not only make that change, but not only help other filmmakers make that change, but make that change ourselves. So I think there's something very inspiring about being able to grant people, not grant, I think that might be the wrong word, but there's something very special about being able to collaborate and dream with people about better futures. And I hope that as an editor, I can continue to dream better futures with other filmmakers.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much. Your answers are so thoughtful, and we really just have enjoyed the chance to talk with you and find out more about your craft. So it's been a great conversation. So thank you so much. We'll talk to you later.